Hello everyone and welcome back to Phoenix Gaming. We are back on our Frosthaven game today. We are going to be talking about this spoiler class, this coming at you, punching you in the face kind of looking things. I assume those are knuckles coming straight for you. And if you don't want to know anything about any spoilers from this point, I suggest immediately turning off this video. There's really no other reason for you to be here. I'm also further going to add that I'm actually going to kick off by talking about unlocking classes in general and a little mini review on my thoughts about that aspect of Frosthaven, which is different from the way that it's done in Gloomhaven. So if you're not interested in that, but you do want to hear my thoughts on the class, just check on the timestamps below. They'll cut you right through to the correct chapter. So I'm going to start off by talking about that. This class is a 50-50 shot of being the very first class you're going to unlock in your Frosthaven campaign. I'm being a little bit exaggerative there, but it's almost certainly going to be the case. And if you've played through a few scenarios, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This class gets unlocked with the story rather than through your retirement like it did in Gloomhaven. I really, really like this change thematically. It makes a ton more sense. And also, it just leads to some really fun moments of discovery. So the satisfying, feeling of getting this class really early on, I thought was a huge, huge win. And is, I think, one of the reasons why this class has probably more written on the internet about it than most other classes that I've seen, which is actually kind of why I've held off on playing it. But this is the first class that I played after retiring Bone Shaper, so I do have some thoughts about it. I did think it was a really fun class to play. It's listed as a kind of lower difficulty, lower complexity class, and I don't know that I fully agree with that. I think that it's something that you have to, well, it's not hard to play, but in order to manage it well, there's a little bit more kind of fiddly management, more, I guess, Euro style management than I think a handful of other classes in the Frosthaven world have. That being said, its base play kit is pretty straightforward. So it is fine that you're playing that little management mini game along the way there. The one thing I do want to say about unlocking classes in Frosthaven, though, is that unlocking this class really early means that you kind of have to wait a while until you get to play it, which I think was a little bit of a bummer because you're kind of waiting as your retirement. And so I wish there was a little bit of a smoother way of saying, you know what, we've just unlocked this character. I'm going to put the character that I'm playing on the shelf and essentially start a new campaign or new quest with someone else. It would be nice if there was some kind of adaptation to that rule set as well, with the sort of change of what retirements look like, but that's kind of a small quibbling point. Without any further ado, let's get into talking about our friend here, the Frozen Fist, who, first of all, just has incredible artwork. They clearly love him because they put him on the front of the box. If you were not anticipating that he was going to join your team, like I was not, it was a very nice surprise to see that the Algox are not all just there being big dunderheads, but instead they have a very kind of complex, political relationship with Frosthaven and with each other. And there's a few different ways to kind of handle that storyline, and it is exemplified in essentially which of these classes you end up getting along the way because of the mission that's there. So let's start off by looking at Frozen Fists. They spend a lot of time here talking about One with the Mountain, which is what we're going to kick off with after that. So I'm not going to talk about it on this chart. We're just going to point out that this guy with his see-through numbers, he has the huge amount of hit points that you would have with one of these huge beefy looking classes. That makes a lot of sense. I remembered reading someone complaining somewhere online that Frosthaven nor Gloomhaven have any monk classes. And for me, Frozen Fist is about as close to a monk class as you can get. I'm not sure what the expectations or hope would be, but it's a big guy that runs around punching people, so that works for me. They list him, as I said, as a pretty low complexity class. I think I personally would put him maybe at 3, just because managing, constant up and down hit points is tedious is not the right word, but it does require you to sort of be very attentive to that. That being said, the cards and card play are not that complicated, so that's probably what warranted the low complexity on this class. Those elemental affinities do come into play a fair amount with this class, and I will say It feels like, and I haven't actually done any kind of like statistical or counting or anything like that, but it feels like there are a fair number of monsters in Frosthaven that generate your elements for you, which make you a bit more interactive with enemies than I think some other classes or some other elemental affinity types along the way here. Class is listed as high melee, a high defense, which makes sense. You run around punching people. You don't do a ton of damage with this class, but you are kind of always in the mix of it. You got a ton of hit points. You have a lot of healing. The support, though, is kind of a middle bar. You're not so great at healing others. You generally focus on healing yourself. Mobility is pretty good. Just have kind of a high movement speed, a couple jumps that you can move around. And you mess around with putting ice on the board. And ice is a little funny. I wanted to do more with the ice with this class, and I found myself a little bit disappointed. I think making ice on the board and making that a part of the build is more of a sub build, or just kind of like a incidental thing than a kind of core element of the class. And absolute garbage at ranged, and not really much in the way of control, effects on enemies or putting a lot on the map, except for ice, which actually is almost like anti-control, because enemies can usually come towards you a little bit faster while you're playing this class. So let's start off by talking about One with the Mountain, which is kind of the fundamental card of the class. One with the Mountain is, I think, singularly the most insane card in all of the Haven games. Maybe not like Reviving Ether on the Spellweaver in the beginning that like picks up, off all these hands from the discard pile again. But there's a lot of text at the top here, so we're just going to kind of break this down into pieces. Essentially what this says, just in short version, is if you've played this top ability, first of all, you get 2 experience, hooray, this is going to last for the rest of the scenario, hooray. But if you've played the top of One with the Mountain, at the end of every one of your turns, or at the end of the round, not your turn, before kind of discarding the cards that are in play, of the 2 cards you played, you can essentially rebate one of them back into your hand, as if you'd used a stamina potion or something like that, but you have to take some damage to do so. The equation there threw me off, so I often found myself I'm really good at math. I just found myself just making it easier to refer to this chart here until I kind of learned it for a while. But essentially, it's two damage that you're going to take for returning a level 1 card, and then for every 2 levels above that, it's essentially 1 extra damage, right? So one thing right off the bat is that it is slightly more efficient to be returning odd level cards in theory. Like if you think that a higher level card is better than a lower level card, you're better off returning a level 3 card to your hand than a level 2 card to your hand, because you're paying the same amount of hit points for them. But that's a really, really tiny little distinction there. I found that most of the time I was just using this to return level 1 cards to my hand constantly. And one aspect of playing this class was that I was a lot more cognizant of playing level 1 cards with my level whatever cards than I am with almost any other class or any other kind of play style, because I wanted to be paying fewer hit points and managing kind of my card management along the way. And yeah, I really enjoyed that as a way of managing. You all know I play 2-player. I was definitely the primary tank. I was playing with a very skinny little kickable character, and so I was the one who was going to be getting hit most of the time. However, one thing that helps you mitigate that sort of losing 2 hit points constantly thing is that you always are healing 1 hit point at the beginning of your turn. This, whenever you do not have Rejuvenate ability, is low-key incredible. It's just kind of the last line on here, but you always heal 1 hit point at the beginning of every one of your turns. The only exception is if you have poison, and you knock that poison off immediately because you have the Rejuvenate. You are immune to Bane, more or less. You are immune to Wound completely. Like, those effects have no negative ability on you. And then you have an interesting relationship with getting brittled, by snow imps and things like that, in that if the timing works out well, you don't care that you get brittled, but you need to make sure that you're not getting brittled and then getting immediately slammed by an enemy. So it kind of depends on the pairs of enemies that are in the room and how the initiative order is going for you. Now, the bottom of One with the Mountain is also just absolutely insane. A 4 self-heal that generates the 2 elements you need and puts a ward on you is incredible. It's very, very, very powerful, but unfortunately, you'll play that bottom ability almost never, because putting that top ability in play is what gives you longevity with this character. How can you put a card like this on a character like this? It's because you have an 8-card hand. The 8-card hand is saying, look, this means that you can keep playing this scenario for a while. I think there are a couple ways that you can get away with playing the bottom of this ability. It involves things like stamina potions or maybe other characters that might let you pick up cards from your discard pile, or other abilities at later levels that let you pick up a card from a discard pile. That certainly is one way of doing it. You can get by with this character by kind of not doing one with the mountain on your first lap, right? Your first 8 cards, so your first 4 turns, if you want to just kind of like burn through and play that way, and then put one with the mountain into play in your kind of after your first rest cycle and then going into your second rest cycle. That would be a reasonable way to approach this class. You're still going to have pretty decent longevity, but putting this into play early is sort of the default mode. Like in 90% of the games that we played, my first turn was put one with mountain into the play. If there's a scenario where the enemies are like right on you at the beginning, or it's a very, very short scenario, then yeah, you might play this for its bottom instead of the one with the mountain at the top. But you can use this immediately, the turn that you play it, right? If you play this along with anything else, and this bottom one's a great example. This is one where I actually would choose to go slower in initiative, because then people can maybe come up and hit me. I won with the mountain, do a little bit of healing for me and adjacent allies, make a green, which is going to help me next turn. And then I'm going to pick up this card by paying 2 hit points, put it right back into my hand. And now I've got a 7-card hand going into the second round of the game, with the idea that I'm only going to be using one card, every turn going forward. So you just have such longevity with this class. If you put one with the mountain in play at the beginning, and then you're managing your hit points rather than managing your cards in the same way as you would with other classes. That being said, losing a card to mitigate damage with this class is more painful than it is with any other class, because your cards, I don't want to go into a long diatribe about the effect, but your cards are essentially twice as maybe too much of a claim, but I would say 50% more important. Like every card that you have is about 50% more important than cards for other classes, because of the fact that you're essentially playing one at a time. So, losing a card, what it cuts from this and subsequent rest cycles, has more negative impact on you. So you're really trying not to lose cards along the way. And to that same effect, you probably are, aside from one with the mountain, not going to be playing lost cards until you are absolutely finishing out the scenario. Without any further ado, let's dive into the level 1 cards. I'm going to start with the 2 cards that I would consider to be the absolute workhorse cards of this class. These are the cards that I was almost taking with me along into scenarios, even at higher levels. And like I said, this is a class where I really was thinking about what level 1 card I was playing with higher level cards. And keep in mind that when you have an 8-card hand and one of those cards is immediately going away to one with the mountain, the number of level 1 cards that you're taking with you when you're level 5 or 6 is significantly less than that of your peers. So the workhorse cards really matter the most, like which of your level 1 cards you find to be most significant. And this is the card for me, Encased Punch. It is an okay attack at the top that becomes a little bit more okay if they're standing in the right condition, but that second ability of when you take damage and adjacent enemy suffers 1 damage is a really nice incidental little like just frying people bonus. So this card basically, reads do 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 damage in a turn, without having to do a ton of setup for it. And goofy stuff can even happen this if you have an ally that does like 1 damage to all adjacent allies and enemies. There are some allies that have attacks like that, and they do like 1 to you and 1 to your enemy, but you just took 1, so that enemy takes another one. You could do some kind of cute combo stuff with this, and generates an ice, which for a lot of your cards allows you to just do kind of like level up thing, and also is one of your primary methods of getting experience with this class is by consuming those primary elements. But the real reason that I play this card is because it's initiative 19, which is pretty amazing on a melee class, and the bottom is a move forward jump. So a huge amount of mobility that you're just constantly picking up every turn and leaping to wherever you like to be to make this class highly mobile. A default starting turn 1 for me is to play one with the mountain on the slow initiative, and then Encased Punch at the bottom to put myself where I want to be going into the next round. And then what I could do is play Encased Punch again, right? Because I just picked it up thanks to the one with the mountain's ability, paid a couple life, punch somebody, and then jump away or jump into a more meaningful position. This card just does so much. The other workhorse card that I upgraded to make it even more impactful for me is almost its twin, right? Fury of the Mountain here wants to consume ice. And so these two, in my mind, are friends with one another because I'll often encase punch followed by Fury of the Mountain maybe on the following turn, assuming I use the top part of encase punch rather than the bottom part of encase punch. Attack 2 is not exciting, but an attack 4 gain an experience is totally solid on a melee class. The other thing is that when you suffer damage this turn, take 1 less. This is just a better shield 1, and initiative 23 is not the fastest initiative for dropping a shield, but considering you get to punch someone as well, I really like this card. And again, I mentioned those like cute things. If you have an ally that does a wee bit of damage to you, you just get to suddenly ignore that, which makes them maybe have a little bit more flexibility that they wouldn't have. So you can kind of pair up nice with allies that might have those sort of negative detriments along the way. The bottom here is okay, a small move, and throwing up a little incidental retaliate is okay. Mostly you're playing it, I think, for the low initiative. If you're doing a move to retaliate 1, you're probably not going to make a lot of plans around this. But hey, chowing down on green energy to get some experience along the way. I liked this card enough that I increased the move on it so that I could do what I wanted it to do. In general, Fury of the Mountains bottom would get played in scenarios where I did not need to move far because I liked the incidental, bonus retaliate. And then encased punch, the bottom would get played in situations where I did need to move pretty far. All right, this second group of cards is a little funny. It's sort of like heals and area attacks. Why those things are together, I can't really tell you. It's just because of the way the cards are sort of paired with one another. So essentially, you'll see what I'm talking about, but a number of these cards essentially say like do something and something not that effective, but against a lot of people, or juice yourself back up. Voice from Below was a card that for me ended up getting cut a lot. You already know my opinion about looting and how I don't think it's that impactful. That being said, if you're managing to do all of the top part of this, looting and attacking 2 and +1 to all heals targeting you this round, and you pair this with a bottom ability that heals you, of which you have several of, all of a sudden that card is doing a lot of work, which is pretty nice. You just need to, I think, set up to generate the additional value of it, and it makes it green for itself. So I actually think that Voice from Below might be my favorite loot card that exists. That being said, I just am so often preferring to like punch people as my top actions, or throw some heals on myself from top actions, or something like that I didn't find myself having the space to essentially play Voice from Below a lot. I did, however, play the bottom of this card a decent chunk, just an incidental heal 2 for me and my ally, which, maybe they're struggling with poison and wounds in the way that I'm not. It's just a nice little perk, and then making that additional green there. I did find myself a lot of times, jump somewhere, punch someone, stand there punching them and healing myself until they went down, and then, moving somewhere else. That being said, like Voice from Below has got low numbers on it, so this is not a card that lived for a long time for me. It kind of depended on what the scenario's demands were, but that was one that I cut quite a fair amount. Primal Bellow is better depending a lot on what your party composition is, how good pushing enemies 1 space within 3. Really depends on the scenario, really depends on what your allies are. I will say that I quite like Primal Bellow as a door breacher. So, if you're near a door and then you do a move forward to go into a room, and you have a lot of options of where to go, where you might be pushing enemies from a fair distance so that they can or cannot attack you, or you push them into traps or into corners in the setup of the room, maybe doing additional damage. It doesn't do that much, but I will say that the top here surprised me in how effective it is. That being said, I took this card along with me a fair amount just for the bottom, that heal 3, and then pick up the green along the way. Remember that healing is more important on this class than it is on literally any other class, because your cards, everything is just translated into hit points when you have one with the mountain up. So your cards are worth hit points, drawing more cards is worth hit points, and you're constantly going up and down in your hit point tracker. So getting that additional heal 3, it does more work on this melee class than it does on any other kind of class. Frost Eruption also has a heal on the bottom. It's one that's amazing if you have the right setup for it. It's hard to have both the green and the blue active at the same time because generally your cards activate one of those things along the way. But it happens often enough that, it's very satisfying to like heal for and take a bless along the way. If you're only going to have one of the two, taking the green is most beneficial. And so you did notice that these kind of two previous healing cards, they generated green. Green's kind of your healing color, whereas ice is your aggro color. And so, if you're just standing there like hard tanking, meaning that like you're not moving out of the way, people are coming up and smacking you, and you've got allies behind you who are like shooting at the enemies, spam heal over and over on yourself. This card does a good job with that. The top of this card is like fine. It does some attack and pushes people, which is better again depending on what classes and what scenarios you're in. So you'll know sort of when to take this. I thought creating the icy terrain ability would be kind of more important and more fun. One thing that's a little bit goofy about this is that generally you're pushing the enemies away, and some of your cards say, oh, you want the enemy to be on the icy terrain. So there's a little bit of like a mismatch in terms of what it is that you're trying to do with the top of this card. It's going to be better in some scenarios than others. I found that more often than not, I did the bottom of this ability. This card is a really terrible initiative because it's just indecisive about what it wants to be. So Frost Eruption was a pretty common cut for me, but I was happy to be running it at the lower levels. Cold Boulder is also another card that is sort of like doesn't know what initiative it wants to be. I mean, 70 is slow enough, and you look at the bottom, you're like, oh, move 4 or even a move 6. I already move enough as this class that I actually did not find that I needed this card very much. So past my low levels, this was a card that I almost never took with me. Even though move 6 is really, really spicy, just being able to move 4 repeatedly every turn, I was like, this isn't really the card that I need. And the top of this card, doing an attack 2, against one area where you created this ice. First of all, I mean, thematically, really, really cool that you punch the ground or whatever and it attacks everyone around it. I do really, really like the theme of that. And it's really nice that this ability says, hey, you take damage from an attack, you get to heal yourself, which is like, I'm really not... It's almost like that the other ability that's like anytime you take damage you take one fewer, but just slightly different enough in case healing matters in one way, and also it's only from attacks, not from general damage. But you have to pair this card with a low initiative because otherwise it just doesn't do what it's doing. So this card doesn't fundamentally do anything incredible on its own. The bottom needs the additional ice to be incredible because you already have lots of move 4s. The top here needs you to be paired with a high initiative, and you need to be in a setup where the enemies are clustered in a nice way. And again, I'm playing 2-player primarily, so it doesn't really do the same amount of work for me. Even I think if you are playing multiplayer and have more opportunities to trigger it, you need the enemies to be standing in the right kind of position, and it's still only an attack 2, so you're hoping for no shield enemies. Cold Boulder is neat, but I don't think it's going to last for a terribly long time unless it's just the right scenario for it. Then we're going to move into kind of these are the more niche cards. I think Shard Launch might be your literal only ranged attack, except for that Primal Bellow. And frankly, I liked Primal Bellow more. It was because of the teammate that I was playing with that the push mattered a little bit more than doing an attack 2 on a couple people. So I'll say that part. But the initiative here sucks. And the bottom part is okay, but I already have a move 4 jump that I can just use over and over again. So one of the things that's interesting about this class is that, a lot of times in the Haven games, you can say, oh, this does this, so in a vacuum it's really good. But like, if I already have something that moves and jumps, I have it on any turn that I essentially want to pick it up again, because I just keep rebuying that card at the end of my turns if I'm concerned about jumping a lot. So move 3 jump here just pales in comparison. Yes, it is nice for engaging with those ranged enemies who are now immobilized, take an additional incidental point of damage, but Shard Launch was a card that I tried a couple times and it never really impressed me. It just was outshadowed by the other things that were around. Ice Blast is really funny. It's a move 4 at the bottom. Again, a card, you see how many move 4s there are in this class with a nice little incidental bonus here. But this is a card that, again, really I cut it in most scenarios because the top here, amazing. Attack 5, everyone adjacent to you and they're pinned. Sure, why not? Like, do pile of damage. But This class really does not like losing cards. You just don't have the hand size to not be penalized for it. So you're always waiting for the last room to use this card. And then sometimes you get to a last room and it's not in a bunch of adjacent enemies kind of room. You can't always tell that from the scenario setup. So it would sometimes just end up being kind of a disappointing attack one person for 5 for a lost card, or, probably you can pull off getting 2 enemies, but the idea that you would get 3 or 4 harder. You can jump into the right position, but just not with the number of players that we were playing with and everything like that. So I think this card, again, gets cut on the earlier side. And you might be like, we're talking about cutting so many level 1 cards, but remember, with this class, when you level up, your hand size is so small. So they end up getting, it feels like they end up getting, you make a lot more cuts relatively, proportionally, than it does to most other classes. Freezing Shell is another card that I didn't use a ton. The top of this card, like just throw up some shields, get rid of your disarms and muddles, is really, really niche and specific. It's also really goofy, right? You like remove your disarm that you have on you now, but it's not like you're attacking. It's just about to go away anyway at the end of your turn. Same thing with the muddle. So that second line of removing them is basically useless because you've already acknowledged that you're not attacking this turn. So the top part of this card I played almost never. The bottom part I played more often. Again, it was because of the ally that I was with mattered. The pull thing was more impactful in our group than it normally would be. And getting to pull a lot of enemies towards you could really set up some nice situations. In fact, the card that we just poo-pooed can benefit pretty greatly from pulling a bunch of enemies into space, and you punch them in a big circle. Really, really satisfying. But you need the right circumstances for it to be set up with a little incidental 1 damage on the side and a huge. I think this is your best initiative card at level 1. So often it was taken just for the initiative and that bottom move with a pull on it as just another option of what to do. And then this would often be a card that kind of after it did its job would be an easy, long rest away card. And then Piercing Pummel is the card that you take with you when you got a scenario that has enemies with shields. That's pretty much the reason that you take this card. It's an okay initiative with sort of like a weird retaliate tacked on to initiative 30. The bottom on this card is absolutely bananas. It is a lost card, but it is one that is always amazing. Jump 3, attack 5, heal the amount of damage that you do with this card. And it has a weird text at the bottom. It's the amount of damage suffered by the targets of the attack ability, even though you're only attacking one person. So kind of some implications there of like, hey, if you combo this with a cool item, then even better for you for doing so. I think the bottom of this card is extremely pushed, but and that's appropriate for a lost card on this class. But the reason you take this with you is for the top part of the card, and then you get to kind of cash in on it at the end. So this is a fun card. I mean, basically, if there's any number of shield in a scenario, I take this card with me because you're not that great at attacking. I mean, you'll notice that most of the attacks that we listed there are 3 and 4 anyway. I really view this class a lot more as just kind of like a trundling juggernaut. You're very, very hard to kill, healing yourself, walking places, maybe pushing or pulling enemies and doing a couple incidental points of damage. But it is your job to just sort of like inexorably advance in the direction, well, not slowly because you might be like hopping around like crazy, but you are kind of just advancing to where you need to go. And a lot of times your allies are the ones who are going to be dishing out the pain. Level 2, you can tell here that I took Draw of the Bedrock because this is just an enhancement ability that I threw on there. Hopefully it's not like the other one from my other video where I put on a diamond on a place that's a square. I think that's actually a legal play there. But I took Draw of the Bedrock primarily because it's a 10 initiative. I liked being able to, the top there has some really interesting stuff going on. If you have the right elements, then an attack 2 brittle experience point 2 shield at initiative 10 is amazing. The amount of times that you have both elements are very, very low. But I did a decent amount of bottom healing that generated greens. And so an attack 2 brittle shield 1 is pretty respectable, especially if you're kind of counting on your allies to do the primary points of damage. Brittle can do some pretty saucy stuff depending on who you are playing with. So Draw of the Bedrock was a nice option for me for that reason. And the bottom of this card, like I said, the ally I was playing with really benefited from pushes and pulls. And so pulling someone from 4 spaces away, maybe pinning them, throwing up a retaliate 2, there's just a lot of like text and options on that card, which in a vacuum are only okay, but there are just a lot of scenarios where doing these kinds of things can lead to some fun chicanery. All of that being said, Draw of the Bedrock ended up being only an okay card for me. I thought it was going to be kind of amazing on its text line because it's just got so much going on with it. But what that often also meant is that it was never really incredibly impressive. It was hard for all of the text lines to matter in the right circumstances. So I don't think you'd be making a poor choice by going with Crushing Crystals here. The upside of Crushing Crystals and the top part of it, if you can, the attack I think is basically worthless unless you have ice that you've used with it, which suddenly makes it a pretty sweet attack. If you can double disarm enemies with it, that's obviously amazing. And then the bottom here is just a nice basic like move 2, heal 2 self. Maybe you're creating some ice along the way as well. But I think you're taking Crushing Crystals for the top of the card, and then just making sure that you're generating that ice along the way, so you can benefit that disarm thing. I could certainly see a scenario where you are kind of trying to like repeatedly do Crushing Crystals to disarm folks, but I don't know that it's possible for you to generate enough ice, because ice generally is generated by your top punching actions rather than by your bottom actions. So you couldn't repeatedly, pick up this card and then keep generating ice with your bottom actions to do some really nasty stuff. So it kind of depends on what generation looks like in your party as a whole. I think if you're going to consider Crushing Crystals at level 2. I'm not entirely sure what to make of the level 3 options. I took Lacerating Eruption, which by the way is attack 2 red. Sorry that the see-through, we're on a red screen today. So I took it for that reason, and that ability to then attack 5 spaces. Even in 2-play or attacking 5 spaces, you're going to hit 2 or 3 bad guys a decent amount of the time. Like I said, this class isn't doing a ton of damage, so being able to do 3 to multiple enemies seemed worthwhile to me. The upside of like being able to attack upwards of 5 enemies and then giving them all wound and attack 3 just seemed great on a repeatable card. I've already mentioned that like generating sufficient elements to trigger both of them is quite unlikely. But the other thing with this card is its bottom ability, which is just a normal fine move, does generate that ice, which I found I was struggling to generate ice more than I was struggling to generate greens. And I think a lot of the cards pay off more by generating ice. So that's why I took Lacerating Eruption. But it's crap initiative and kind of just, it is an okay card. It was like a totally fine staple card, but I very, very rarely found myself wanting to pay my hit points to pick up this card. I just pay to pick up one of the level 1 cards that was probably doing more for me anyway. Frozen Over is, if you're leaning more into that icy terrain side of the build, I don't love when those top abilities throw like a brittle on enemies unless you kind of got a nice 1-2 punch with your party. So this is a card that really benefits from communication and structure with your party members, making sure that you're doing the right things and the right kind of damage at the right time. So just be aware that brittle is a type of action that really wants you to think at length about what the rest of your party is doing and talking to each other about who is doing what when. They kind of need to learn that, I'm going to maybe brittle those guys this turn, that means you're going at initiative 20, and ideally they're going pretty shortly after that to take advantage of, their attack 4s or attack 5s that are suddenly going to be doubled. Throwing a ward on yourself, obviously nice. The bottom of this card seemed, if you didn't have to do all this work, like if the bottom of this card was shield 1, move 1, and then like the green made it +2 move to 3, I think that I would be a little bit more inclined towards the bottom. But requiring having green elements to move 3 seemed like kind of a serious tax to me and put me off of taking Frozen Over. So if you found that it's more successful than that for you, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. But I was skeptical. I figured I would find myself very annoyed with the amount of times that I would need to be moving 3, or that I needed to set up to be moving 3. And so it was like, well, do I really care about having a shield 1 as my bottom when I could just be doing a heal 2 or a heal 3 instead? It's going to kind of functionally amount to the same thing. So I did not find myself too drawn in that direction. But I think either of these cards is, again, a reasonable choice at this level. Frozen Over, especially if you're trying to go a little bit more tricksy on the ice building side. The level 4 cards, on the other hand, feel like they punch way above their weight class. I took Mountain's Fist because I had just taken the Lacerating Eruption, which generated an ice on the bottom. So Mountain's Fist then reads attack 5 experience. If you kill someone, heal 3 health. There's just too much good stuff on there, and to make a green along the way. There's too much good stuff on there to say no to, particularly on a card with a very good initiative. The bottom of this card, and the reason that good initiative really matters here is because you have a very good sense of whether that move 5 is going to kill somebody. So you could time playing this card more or less perfectly that you are quite likely to trigger all effects of this card. If you've been playing this class since level 1-2, you also have a decent attack deck by the time you've hit level 4, assuming that you're any good at getting the check marks. So that means that you're just more likely to know that you're going to be able to kill an enemy by having to remove those negative cards from your deck. The bottom of this card is fine too. I mean, you're not in the search of move 4s, so sometimes the pin is relevant, but you're playing Mountain's Fist for the top. You're also playing Pack Solid for the top. Punch 4 with a stun attached to it, if you have the right green element to use along the way, is really good. The bottom of this card is fine with the Shield 1, Retaliate 1, but Initiative 55, it has to be paired with something that's on the faster side, which is fine. You have those level 1 cards that do the workhorse cards that do their basic attacks and decrease the amount of damage that you take or something like that along them. So I think that's kind of the main pairing there, but the stat lines on them are just a little bit too small for me. I think that if you're leaning towards Pack Solid, should be for that green generation, but I just liked the idea of finishing people off and healing rather than having to worry about stunning them along the way anyway. I think this is one of the toughest level 5 choices you can make on any of the unlocked classes. I went with Preserved Fury because I really liked the card management side of this class, and Preserved Fury allows you to not just play one with the Mountain at the beginning of the game, and if you do play one with the Mountain, it just makes your card longevity just even longer. So it's kind of, you're always picking up cards. You can use any element to pick up more of your discarded cards. I think the neat thing to do with Preserve Fury is use the bottom of one with the Mountain, and then Preserve Fury you can use to sort of like scoop it back up again. The Preserve Fury also doesn't care about the level of the cards, and so I think that Preserved Fury is probably more impactful if you are thinking that you're going to play this card to level 6, 7, 8, or 9. I will say that in my experience, Preserve Fury underperformed for what I thought it was going to do. Like, yes, it picked up some cards for me, but I already was pretty good with the longevity side of things. And this often ended up being like an attack 2, have an additional round later in the scenario, which wasn't really as much as I quite wanted it to do. I found that it was often a card that I was going to pitch during my long rests over even my level 1 cards because I wanted to, be picking those cards up again. So even though, like, if this card even didn't have that restriction of you cannot use one with the Mountain to pick up this card, which I understand they do that essentially because you could go infinite. You could just have infinite turns with this. You also would just like be standing around, like I don't think that it would really, it's a good line to have on there, but the card is just not impactful enough that essentially you just hanging out, I think is worthwhile. I would not fault you at all for trying instead Ice Uppercut. I didn't really take a lot of the ice things. I'd been kind of disappointed by the generation of ice and how hard it was. It's also very difficult for an enemy to be occupying icy terrain because if they walk onto any icy terrain, they slide right over it. So the icy terrain needs to be like right in front of you so they bump into you, or you generated it underneath them, which is feasible. You can do that. But to not get the attack 6 push 2 because they're on icy terrain felt sad. But a base attack 5 is the best attack you're going to have in your deck for quite a while. I had just picked up the previous one that's attack 5 if you used an ice, so to me that felt like plenty. In the bottom here, just another move 4 that does a different thing, but on a great initiative. Both of these cards are solid, but like I said, Preserve Fury to me I thought was going to be like totally amazing and backbreaking, and ended up being just kind of like a mediocre staple card rather than something that was impressive. Again, If you're hitting higher levels, I think this is probably more exciting because you can pick up the really spicy cards with it. Glacier Slam is hilarious. It just attacks too many people, and it just is such a ridiculous, bizarre pattern. I like the I punch the ground and ice spikes come out in different directions. Like I can see that on the card, so I took it for the lulz, honestly. But that muddle on there actually is pretty respectable. That's a lot of bad guys that you're going to be giving disadvantage to as they're attacking you, and it's frankly not as hard as it might seem to hit a lot of people with this, especially if you're up front tanking. They come and swarm you, and some of them can't quite get at you. This actual attack pattern, like it looks like one of those attack patterns that you're like, yeah, it's never going to work. Actually worked a fair amount for me. I found that I almost never got the benefit of the, if they're on icy terrain, pierce thing. That line on there is it feels more cute than anything, but I'm sure you can set up good circumstances for it. The bottom of this card too might be viable. You have primarily move 4s, and every once in a while you need a little bit of extra boost. So having a little bit of extra boost there with some incidental bonus damage on it is suddenly the first move card in ages that we've actually even considered. So both sides of Glacier Slam are good. It does come at the expense of a very low initiative. Although that being said, most of this class so far has had low initiatives and medium initiatives. So sometimes it's nice to have that slow initiative so that you can intentionally go after enemies, particularly if you're looking for them to cluster up in a kind of funny way. So you can do that with this card. Actually, like using it for its slow initiative is one of the very real perks of doing it. Thick Frost, on the other hand, is generally we've seen healing on the bottom of our cards rather than the top of them. So heal 3 is whatever. A heal 6 is a lot of work, and take 1 fewer damage. Like this is full on, I'm going to tank mode, which is pretty nice. That being said, I imagine that I'm probably using this card more for the bottom. Like a move 2 throw up a ward is just a nice incidental perk along the way. I played this class pretty tanky, but we needed some extra juice, so Glacier Slam was happy for me. I think both these level 6 cards are very good. Let me take it back. I think both these level 6 cards are quite solid. You're not going to be blown away by anything that they're doing. I think that's often a lot of the case with this class. If you're really looking to do something like huge and spicy, this class is not generally that. Like this class is sort of just, we're constantly generating damage on bad guys and getting in their way and doing a really solid job of that, but you don't kind of do weird explosive combos in the way that some other classes do. All right, I retired at level 6, so we're getting into the territory of speculations for me. Seeing Stars is just a solid straight up card, punching people for a lot of damage, pushing and muddling, and then generating an element of your choice. That's a totally awesome punch card. I would probably see myself taking that because a big wallop tends to be better in 2-player, and like I said, I also just took Glacier Slam so I can attack a bunch of people at once. The bottom here is pretty cool because, I've talked about how we don't really need those moves jumps. We're already pretty good at being mobile, but we don't have a move attack yet on the bottom, and an attack 3 with a muddle on it. That's a lot of, that's just 6, right? That's 6 stuff at the bottom of this card. That is really, really good. Gift of the Mountain here is really funky. Getting yourself advantage essentially on everything this turn and the next turn if there's any element to consume, which is usually not that hard to wait until the time to do this. And then you go skating around the room, punching people along the way. I think this card seems like almost like a meme build around card where it's asking you also to take items that maybe are kind of supporting this, right? Like do additional move effects on your turn or increase your move so you're moving around more people. There's something really fun about just Sonic the Hedgehogging your way through a room and zapping everybody that you run past. The bottom of this card, is wild. It is clearly paired, being called Gift of the Mountain is clearly meant to be paired as one with the mountain, and then you're just healing an additional 2 hit points every turn. That is so much healing on a lost card. You can go down to 6 cards by one with the mountain and gift of the mountain, and then you're healing 3 hit points every turn, and then paying somewhere between 2 to 5 hit points to pick up cards from your discard pile. So I've talked down the lost cards, but it's certainly very tempting to be a little bit more explosive, I guess, in the sense that you're just like, yeah, hit me. I've got hit points for a million days. I mean, at level 7, you're 22 hit points. So 22 hit points, healing 3 every turn, even though you're spending hit points to pick up cards, that's you're going to be lasting for a good long many years. So for those of you who do the kind of like more ridiculous build, Gift of the Mountain seems like its ceiling is much higher on both the top and the bottom, but Seeing Stars is just straight up solid. So I honestly don't know what I'd pick with here. It'd probably depend on the day and how spicy I was feeling in terms of, do I want to do something goofy or do I want to just be solid? I'd probably have to look a little bit at my class, a little bit at my item build to consider which of these would be good for me. All right. I think Draw Strength is one of those screw you 2-player cards. The top of the card is, attacking 2 people for 5, then right, attack 10 is great, and then you get to ward yourself as well. But essentially, if this card it's just an attack 5 if you don't hit 2 people, you're more likely going to be in that situation in a multiplayer game. So I would not be taking Draw Strength, because playing this for just an attack 5 would feel so bad. Even though an attack 5 is like totally respectable on its own, I would just be so disappointed by the times that it didn't trigger the top of this that I wouldn't want to do that. And then the bottom here, the more enemies there are, the more damage they're going to take, and the more triggers of this you get, the more different allies that you can give strength to. But if you only have one ally and they're not a summon class, that doesn't do a whole lot. So for me, Draw Strength is like straight in the can, unless you're playing a maybe 3 or 4-player game. This card is not for 2-player play at all, which is a little bit rude. I honestly haven't seen a design yet that I think is kind of so egregiously like that. It feels like maybe I'm just being a little overly salty here. Shattering Blow has like an amazing stat line at the top, but frankly, it's a lost card. It's a lost card that only gives you experience if you have the right elements for it. But if you have it, you're talking, this is the boss breaker, right? Because you're brittling them and then doing an attack 8 in the ideal world, which is really an attack like 16 essentially. So yeah, Shattering Blow is a pretty hilarious top to end a scenario, wall up some elite or kill some boss or whatever. The bottom of this card is pretty cool. Move 3, heal 3, or in the ideal world, move 3, shield 2, heal 5. Honestly, any combination of those elements, like no elements, it's an okay card. Any element, it's a good card. All elements, like that's a lot of numbers at the bottom there on a pretty good initiative. So Shattering Blow is a no-brainer take for me. If you're playing in those 4-player parties, Draw Strength. Yeah, the top part of Draw Strength, you just need to like set up for it, but the top part is so good that you couldn't say no to it. And then if it's that there are enough enemies that you could repeatedly do it over and over again, right? Attack 5, attack 5, attack 5, and then you're like warding yourself. So even though you're paying, what is it? How many hit points are we paying at this point in time? 6 hit points to pick this card back up again. At the level that you're at, a ward might be saving you 6 hit points all in of itself. So I can definitely see that being a good choice in your bigger parties. These level 9 cards are kind of odd to me. They are good. Oh, I love that the green screen just puts this guy's face in the middle of the window there. That's fun. But they don't necessarily fit the same kind of themes that the rest of this class has fit along the way, I think. So what I mean by that is like Frozen Spike there. Nice big area attack that's going to create a bunch of icy terrain along the way. Yes, we make icy terrain, but it's a ranged attack. It's like a ranged bomb attack, which, we kind of do that, but why is it ranged rather than kind of a melee attack? It's only an attack 3, making a few icy terrain tiles. It just doesn't seem like a very good level 9 ability to me. Yeah, it's great to move 6 on the bottom and then throw 3 damage at an enemy if you got an ice there. Like, totally cool. But it seems like good, but not like, oh, it's a level 9 card to me. So Frozen Spike, not the most exciting as far as I'm concerned. Bring Down the Mountain, just inherently, I like the cards named Mountain because that's kind of the theme. So I'm drawn to it that way. I love that 9 initiative as well. But this like making a few obstacles and doing damage, that kind of Savas thing that we've seen across a couple of the different Haven games, is not a thing that we've seen this class do. So it feels like a little bit of a thematic mismatch that we're generating an avalanche, I guess, here, because we just haven't really done anything like that with the rest of the class. It just doesn't entirely miss. So we can attack a lot of different enemies for 2 or 3, which is like okay. And then the bottom of this card is something this class has done, which is just throw up shields and retaliate along the way. I probably am taking Bring Down the Mountain because in a few scenarios, you can attack a zillion people with the top of that card and they happen to not have shields maybe. But the bottom of this card with like a shield to retaliate 4, that probably fits with the playstyle that I generally was rocking when I was playing this class, of just trundling in the way and getting enemies and just slowly generating extra damage to them while my allies were shooting them down. So for me, it's going to be Bring Down the Mountain. I'm sure folks can find a cool way for Frozen Spike to be exciting for them. And I think it's required for one of the masteries, maybe, or not required, but very beneficial for one of the masteries. So I suspect that's kind of its gear. Speaking of, let's move over to talking about perks and masteries. I think that the masteries on this class are the worst designed masteries in the game. The reason is that the first mastery, to recover a card from your discard pile each round, is trivially easy to accomplish. You just need to play in a scenario that's on the easier side where you can afford to pay the hit points every round. And you need to make sure that you do this on rounds where you're resting as well. So you pick up a card and then short rest immediately. You're probably not going to long rest in this scenario, or at least you actively cannot long rest in this scenario. So a scenario where you're short resting and you can pay a few extra hit points inefficiently along the way, but it is very easy to do as long as things are just going decently for you, and you can kind of decide this more or less at any time. You can just give up on going for this mastery if things are going poorly, because you'll play through the first lap and you'll maybe inefficiently pick up a card in the short rest. But most of the time when I played this class, I was always paying hit points to pick up cards anyway. It just kind of requires you to do that play pattern. And then the bottom card here is ridiculous. It requires a ton of setup. I think the highest move card that we saw was a move 6. So we need to at least have generated 4 ice that allows us to kind of slide in various directions, or maybe have some other items or whatnot to structure things. And then to hit an enemy for 10 means we're probably talking about a situation where we've brittled someone and we're hitting them with our 5 or 6 attacks. I don't think there's much other way for us to generate that. And so I don't like that card because essentially it looks at, like, I think 2 or 3 of the cards that we've looked through in the Frozen Fist kit and says, yeah, you really need these cards, and frankly, you're not going to complete this one until you're a much higher level. So I'm not a fan of the designs on these masteries because of the extreme, in my opinion, extremely easy, extremely difficult nature of the setups, and I don't find that to be the case for a lot of the other classes. The perks here are a nice medley. I think that what you're going to end up choosing is just kind of totally your preference. But let me talk about a few that I think are a little bit above others. I'm grabbing a pen so we can talk about this. Incidental Disarm that removes negative ones from your deck is just like awesome. Like these were some of the first ones that I did. Then of course you can just make your deck better if you want to, which is all good and fine. Or like incidental shields along the way, incidental elements. These all here I think are just a matter of preference. I did try a few of these because at first I wanted to do a little bit more of the icy terrain thing. Again, this is just a matter of preference as far as I'm concerned. Everything from line 2 down to like line 6 here is exactly the same. I threw the add 1 +3 in your deck because I just think it's hilarious to draw the +3. It's often better for you than drawing a critical is, and I just love that. I think it's really amazing. You can almost always use the hit points with this class because you're just always paying and healing, so you're always yo-yoing. So these are fine, but probably I'd be improving my deck first because we are punching people. This is sort of the no-brainer. The ignore item -1 effects means that you can take certain items that you should be taking on a tanky class, and The icy terrain thing, ignoring the effect and getting +1 move, allowing you to like roller skate around the board, even if you only generate 1 or 2 extra icy terrain, comes in handy for the 1 or 2 extra movement in scenarios where you have to run back and forward or there's kind of a central base. You can do actually like completely nutty stuff with this. This perk is pushed, and it's pushed because they want you to take it. It's very, 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 very good. And really fun. I mean, honestly, like that the hockey skating ability does not come into play all that often, but you don't feel that bad when you don't have it, because ignoring item -1 effects is just, I think, in my opinion, one of the tank perks that you end up taking in the Haven games, so that you take the items that you really want to take. I pretty much never did this ability because I found myself short resting a fair amount with this class rather than long resting, just because you have such a small hand size. That means that you're not always resting synchronously with your partner. So I also play with a partner that sort of needed a wall in front of them, so it was hard for me to kind of just let them be. So I just found myself never long resting. And I did grab this ability too. Paying 2 perk points for something is a lot, but having just the one, oh, you criticaled me, I don't want to take that 8 damage is really good. This, in a lot of ways, reads like having an extra card in your hand, because in general, once per scenario, you're like, ooh, should I lose a card for that attack? And with this class, you never really want to lose the card, but because you have this perk, that solves the problem for you. So I think that bottom ability there is well worth your time. And it just kind of depends on how much you want to be giving up, because this attack deck can get pretty good if you get enough perks there. But are you leaning more on the tanky side or more on the aggressive side? That brings us to the end for talking about Frozen Fist here. I thought this was a really fun class. It is, a little bit more straightforward in what it does, but the card management side of it is, I think, a very fun puzzle. You just got to make sure you're always putting your hit points down, your hit points back up again. So make sure you're not forgetting that. But it is nice as a melee class to not have to worry so much about conditions, and you're really just worrying about managing your hit points and your cards constantly. And you get to kind of like plink bad guys along the way, and your friends get to feel like heroes, and you get to feel indestructible, which I think is pretty neat. So hope you're enjoying Frozen Fist. If you had some different experiences than I did, let me know in the comments, things that worked for you or didn't work for you. Love to hear your thoughts about this class as well. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful day.